everybody, and welcome to another episode of Love Selling, Hate Sales. Today, I am joined by Bryan Whittington, the founder of EBS Growth. Bryan, thanks for joining the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you. It's super interesting. So this week, I had a guest on who talked about how organizations, when they want to go up market, right? And they make this transition from commercial sales into the enterprise, right? And when we were talking a little bit show prep, we got into this conversation about someone reading a book and having a, 10-person sales team and wanting to do this massive enterprise motion for like a 1 to 3 call close. And there is that whole idea of the right fit sales motion for your organization, right?
Oh, we absolutely love to overly complicate everything. And then we find that it works for some person, like, that's the silver bullet. So we start to go down that path. Yep. And you got to find the one that's right for you.
Yeah. So when identifying, there's obviously the spectrum. We always think about small business, small, medium business. And then, we've got kind of like the lower tier enterprise and the upper tier enterprise. How do you evaluate right fit? Is it size of sales team? Is it what you're selling? Is it who you're selling to? What are some of the key components that help a company decide the right sales motion for them?
Yeah. So, and let's really define what that sales motion is, right, Josh? Yeah. Because up until I had to look it up, right? Because I started hearing this term and I'm like, what in the world is a sales motion? I've been around the block for a while and I have no idea what it is. And it's apparently a term that's come out in 2013 and it comprises of 2 things. And I've put my own spin on it and add a third. So the first thing that we really look at is that sales strategy. What's our sales strategy to go to it? The second part of that is our sales methodology to support that strategy. And the last part of it is the selling structure, the sales team structure to really execute the plan, right? So strategy, process, plan kind of thing is the way I look at it. And so whenever you look at the sales strategy, what sales motion or how should you determine that, it comes to a couple. I think the most important one is start with the size of your buyers group. Because depending on the complexity of how many people are in your buyers group, that's really going to determine what type of sales strategy it is. Because if I'm 5, 7, 10, however crazy number many people there are in these buyers groups these days, right? It's insane. That's going to be that more complex enterprise sales. So I need a strategy to go along with that. So it is absolutely enterprise sales where I'm doing pursuit maps and looking at the whole entire org chart and everything else. So that's more on the enterprise side. So how many people are in there? The other thing is how many times or how many meetings do I need in order to close one, right? Can I close one call close? Well, then I'm probably more of a commodity. I can rip through this pretty darn quickly, and I'm not even going to go to the complexity of a small to mid-sized business. I'm just going to have, hey, what's your goal? What do you want? What's your pain if I can get any of that? And then, hey, here's the price. Take it or leave it kind of deal, right? So that's the one call close. And then in between there is the SMB, that small to mid-size. And I think that's where the majority of people are. And having some type of stage gate management where you can identify what is it that the people want at every stage. So initially, you're going to want to identify the pain. And I thought it was all about the pain, right? We know Sandler out there and Challenger and everything else. Yeah. And by the way, don't ever ask, right? You don't, but those of you listening, don't ever ask, hey, what's your pain? A horrible question. I hear it all the time. So don't ask for pain. But initially, we're going to want to find pain. And I thought that was it. But after you get through the pain, then you want to ask about gain. So this is what your challenge is. Where are you looking to go? What's the upside? What's the gain? So others call it value of the solution. Right. What's in it for you? So that's the initial stages. And then the next stages is you want to look at those investments. And those investments aren't just dollars and cents. When you get a little bit in more complexity, 3 to 5, as your deal size goes up, there's political capital that goes into it. People are constantly trying to mitigate their risk. So how much of a risk is this? How much political capital is going to have to be spent? Do I need to find a champion, and what do I need to do in order to get that champion, right? So in an enterprise, you're all about the champion, and that smaller stuff, it's not quite as important. So I'm looking at how much time, how much effort, political capital, and by the way, how much money is this thing going to cost? So we look at all of those different investments. And the third piece, especially if you're on more of a simple piece, is I call it the timeline technique. That's the who, what, when, where, why, how. But the beauty is if you can leverage a timeline technique, Josh, you start with the end in mind. So how will you identify that this project is done, that it's good, that's been effective,
what does good look like? Yeah,
what does good look like? And I found the language, you will know this is done when what?
Right.
And oftentimes there's silence. They have no idea. They hadn't really thought about it. Well, how are you going to measure that? What's that look like? And then you can start to reverse engineer. Well, who's all going to be impacted if that happens? Who is going to be impacted if it doesn't happen? Who's being impacted now that it's not happening? And you can start to get the who and then what their perspectives are and lay that whole plan out and timeline and roadmap that so you know exactly their buyer's journey. And by the way, especially whenever we're on these larger, more complex sales where they probably aren't buying this very often, they have no idea how to do it. So you help them identify that map. And so now you've just increased your value to that person.
So totally love the end in mind concept. I think it's a great way to get people to work backwards and think through what people are thinking. And a couple of things came to mind. One is I'm on the advisory board of a software startup right now, and I meet weekly with their sales team. And one of the things that we do is talk about, all right, this week through cold calls and demos and this and that, what's happening? And we uncover this 2-week dark period after a demo. Yeah. And they're asking me, what do we do? This and that. So we're creating this decision tree map right now to try to uncover what people are feeling and thinking in those different stages to do just what you're saying, kind of reverse engineer what we need to get ahead of at these different stage gates that you're talking about. So just to start to get that buyer feedback and get ahead of some of those things. So I love that idea, just the working backwards.
Yeah, and exactly what you're talking about. So whenever by working backwards, that aligns with our sales strategy, right? So if I know at the end of this demo, what's going to be the next step? So, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, at the end of this, one of a couple of things is going to happen. One is you hate this, worst idea ever, and then we'll yell at the champion, right, later on whenever we go away. Or we find out, wait a second, this is pretty good, which might mean we do step A. Or, you know what, we need to do step B. So one of those three things will happen. So at the end of this, let's make sure that we choose one of those before we close out. Can you help me make sure to remember that? Now it's on, you're asking them to remind you to close them for the next step.
Yeah, so you're kind of Sandler upfront contracting them if you go back to Sandler terms. Yeah, no, I love it. So I'm curious, when we're still in the strategy bucket here, right? Talking about the sales motion. And oftentimes what makes or breaks a deal is the presence of a compelling event. Where does that fit? Is that in the strategy bucket? Like, hey, our solution only works or works best when there's these types of compelling events, or is that somewhere down the road? How do you look at that type of thing?
That's a great question. So I would take that compelling event and put that upstream, meaning I want to, and whenever I look at my ICP, who's my ideal customer profile, and then I look at the personas, I want to know when those trigger events are then. So we can better identify it. And then I want to find that as early as possible, because if we can't find that trigger event, if we can't find that emotional compelling reason why to change their behavior. See, in the old days, I was looking for an emotional compelling reason to act. Well, my act might be something small. Like, I'm going to forward this, or, be a coach as opposed to a champion. But instead of that act, I want a change of behavior, because that's really what we're looking for. So if I can't find that reason to change behavior or pay that political capital up front, then I'm going to end that, because if it's a no, if it's an NO, I want a KNOW as quickly as possible.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
That's good that you spit that out so smoothly. I think I would have fumbled that one. Not your first rodeo. I've been doing this
a couple of days. No.
Yeah, I guess so. All right, so we're looking at strategy as the first piece of this motion, right? And things I heard were the size of the buyer group is something to consider as a part of your strategy. The stage gates, how many of those are there? How many meetings to close might you be looking at? And then the investments, right? and then the pain
Correct,
gain. Are
because
those the components that we were talking about?
Yeah, really, I would break it down to the three. How many people in a buyer's group? Okay. How long of a sales cycle? And then how much is that? Because that's going to be the layer of risk.
Very good. All right, I love it. I think that's, I think strategy is one of those words that people are like, what the hell does that even mean? Yeah, and right. I like having those clear outlines for people to think about when they're trying to look at their strategy. All right, so methodology. I think that one gets a lot of play, especially on the social media, Medic and Bant, and there's 1,000 of them now. Give me the rundown. What does sales methodology mean? Why do we use it? Does it still have value in today's sales cycle?
So I would 100% say yes. Sales methodology is critically important. Now that I'm no longer a Sandler trainer, I can say they're pretty darn similar, right? You have to find the ones that are good for you. So if you take a look at the Challenger, right? Teach, tailor, take control. All right, well, isn't that what Sandler's doing? Isn't that what spin selling is doing, right? They're all doing similar things. It was funny. Whenever I left Sandler, I went back just because I hadn't listened to it for a while. I was listening to Dale Carnegie, right? Of all things, Dale Carnegie. And I'm like, wait a second. I haven't listened to this for years. This is all the same stuff.
Same stuff.
So, yeah, exactly. So what I would encourage you to do is what you're doing with your startup on the where you're the board. You identify where things are broken, slowing down. Find the methodology across all of the different methodologies that are out there that are all pretty darn good, and find the tool, the tactic that best fits that, and get that into the playbook. So I won't necessarily say use one methodology out there, because even whenever we're teaching Sandler, I was taking other methodologies because it works. You do what works, right? So find out what doesn't work and then bring that into it. So things like Sandler's upfront contract, which is pretty much ubiquitous out there in the marketplace right now. Questioning strategies. I mean, if you think about the three most important skills that a salesperson needs, it's high EQ. So learning that EQ, however you want to do it, learn that EQ. The second thing is, and I'll give them credit, that upfront contract is really good because it allows you to keep progressing down, right? And then the other part is questioning strategies. Because if I can't do questioning strategies, I can't uncover the problem. And if I can't uncover the problem, I can't identify that emotional compelling reason why they're going to change their behavior. So if we can only do three methodologies, take those three and adapt it into that sales process.
Yeah, a couple things. So can you define EQ for folks who might not know what that means really quickly?
Yeah, forgive me, I shouldn't have used jargon. So EQ is emotional intelligence. So in the old days, I thought emotional intelligence was just how well can I do this? How well can I talk to somebody and engage with somebody? But it's so much more than that. It's do you give your energy away, meaning you have this high need for approval. I have to be liked. And so you're giving your energy away, or you can steal energy away, right? So there's a book by Kim Scott called Radical Candor. And in Radical Candor, right, if you're familiar with it, they talk about the obnoxious aggressive person. That's stealing somebody's energy because you're just attacking them, as opposed to radical candor as being assertive, not aggressive. And that's really whenever you have high EQ, you have active listening, you're assertive, not aggressive, because we have to challenge their beliefs, challenge their status quo to get them to act. So it's all of that in EQ. So it's emotional intelligence of active listening, interpersonal skills, being others focused, and really, I think I already said it, that radical listening.
Yeah, and so when you describe it, thank you for that description. That's very helpful. And when you take that and you combine it with the ability to question, oh man, like to me, that's magic. So I firmly believe that the questions you ask set you apart more than anything else that you say in a sales cycle.
100%, right? Because people get what's the difference between selling a product and selling a service? Well, whenever you sell a product, you screw up because you're all about features and benefits. You love what you're doing, right? You love the product.
Show it. You want to show it off.
Yeah. Hey, look at my shiny little thing, right? And nobody cares. It's like, hey, let me show you my vacation photos. Nobody wants to see those either, except for you and your family, right? So it gets in that questioning strategy allows you to uncover so much more and be the problem solver, because that's the other thing with AI coming in. If you're selling commodities, people just want to order it online. You're going to be out of a job pretty darn quickly if you aren't already. So the key piece is, can I ask right questions? And anything that, well, here's the thing. If I'm features and benefits, stop it right away. And everything that you want to say, couch it in terms of a question. Right. So it's, hey, look at this zippity zappity zoppity. It does X, Y, and Z. Instead of doing that, say, not sure. How important is being able to solve for X, Y, and Z? I don't even know if that's important. And then they can elaborate about it. And then it's, well, I'm not sure if this would help, but let's look at this. And now it's just uncovering this together and allows them to go, oh my gosh, this is brilliant. I think this could help me. Now it's their idea and it's not you selling it to them, because they won't believe you, but they'll trust themselves.
Yeah. And that's very Sandler-esque. And so that's one thing I would say is, I did Sandler, I've done Spin, I've done a number of these things. And they, like you said, they all very similar. The thing I always liked about Sandler was that it was more of a mindset than anything, right? Like all the methodology, it's all fine. Because like you said, they're all very similar. I just like the mindset of it. I think it was very powerful.
Yeah, because the curious thing is, even whenever people are disastrous and they do everything that you shouldn't do in sales, but they do it with confidence and authenticity, it works. I mean, I sit there and go, I wouldn't do it that way, but it's working for you. Keep it up.
The psychology of it's fun.
Yeah,
right. Because like you said, if you say, I'm not sure this is important to you, well, if they defend it, well, now you know it is. If they don't, you can move on. It's just a psychology thing.
And it's so funny too, because people say, stop Sandlering me. I just did it so long, I don't even realize I do it. It's just part of your vernacular,
Yeah. Well, before we move on from the methodology piece, I want to get your take on qualification. And I'm very curious because I feel like qualification hurts sellers more than they know. Because nobody wants to be qualified. It's a bad feeling on the other side. So how do you balance the need for qualification, which I think is a management thing, not necessarily a sales thing, with your ability to build rapport, have good conversations, go through the submarine, so to speak, we'll call it.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's a management thing. I want to self-manage. So it goes back to that idea. If it's a no, if it's an NO, I want a KNOW as quickly as possible.
Of course.
There's a ton of pressure in going for the yes. So whether you call it Sandler, whether you call it Chris Voss, never split the difference, go for that no. There's zero pressure in a no.
I love no's.
Right, exactly. So don't do BANT, because BANT is, to your point, BANT is only for us. It brings no value to them. So I wouldn't necessarily say BANT. So the way that I would do it, in a discovery call or exploratory call, that first substantive conversation, right? So you probably need about a half hour to do it. The way I approach it is I get them to identify their as is, right? How are you doing things today? And then I ask them to rate their as is. Okay, so based upon that today, Josh, one is you're ready to blow everything up, fire them, get rid of the team, right? That's a 1, and I'm not necessarily hearing that. A 10 is angels singing from above, hallelujah. And now here's the trick to that 10. You lay out exactly what life is going to be like with your solution.
Right.
Things you know that they don't have. So you lay that out. Here's what a 10 is. 1 to 10, how would you rate as is? And by the way, let me be a pain in the neck, Josh, you can't choose 7. So now they can't give the teenage answer of meh, right? They have to say whether it's bad, 6 or under, or good, 8 or above. So that allows me to identify it. And then I ask them to tell me, what are the 3, 4, 5 things that take you from that number closer to that 10? Now they tell me exactly what their pain bullets are, and I can unpack that. And I have my 3 magic questions that I take from there to quickly go through that, because I only have 30 minutes. I quickly use my 3 magic questions, and my 3 magic questions are, well, can you give me an example? Because subconsciously now they relive that frustration. So can you give me an example? And because of that, what's happening? It's super open-ended. Because of that, what's going on? And then here's the one that I hate to ask because I don't like the answer. Is doing nothing an option?
Yeah.
And I've never been able to sell somebody that says yes.
Of course not. Well, that's getting to your NO. You better KNOW fast. I mean, if doing nothing is an option, then I guess our time here is done. I mean,
yeah, because I guess if doing nothing is an option, why do this? You have to spend time, money, effort. There's risk involved. Why would you want to change? Yeah. And then they either go, well, I really shouldn't. Bob made me meet with you. Or, well, I say it's really, I could get away with it, but I can't. Well, which is, right? And now you can just dig down a little bit more.
Now you can dig into that conversation.
Precisely.
Yeah, I think that's great stuff because I think you can qualify without qualifying, right? It's a little bit more of the art, but I think it's absolutely necessary to create a good experience for the person on the other end.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the differentiator of the future is going to be two. One, the people, right? How that person is, the people within the organization. And then the second thing is how frictionless can you make that purchase? How frictionless can you make this? Because it's a pain in the neck, and people in B2B want the B2C life, the B2C buyer's path. And it's not there because of what we do. It's so complex. But the further that we can go to that B2C type buying path, the better off I think we'll be and how we can better differentiate ourselves.
Yeah, there was a Gartner study done, I think it was either a year or two ago, that basically they surveyed all of these B2B buyers and asked if there was a way to get through the B2B sales process without a salesperson, what percent of you would want that? And it was a very high percentage. I think it was in like high 60s, low 70%. Now, that's what they want. Is that 100% possible? Probably not. But to your point, I think if you are a startup or a founder or whatever, and you're thinking about how you go to market, going back up to that strategy pillar, I think it's really important that you think about that strategy pillar through the lens of making it as frictionless as possible. Right. And design it, back up into the strategy pillar.
100%, because that's the real idea here is if we can identify our sales strategy, and then we understand the buyer's journey, and we interlace those and find out where the friction points are and bring people or technology to those friction points, I think that's how we can get it better aligned. I think we'll get better and better at that. But it's really taking a look, it's intimately knowing our customer and then aligning to that. And I think too often, like Band's the case, and real case in point. Who wants to go through Band? I mean, no one does, because we get no value. Basically, what you're telling me is, I want to find out if you're good enough to talk to a salesperson. Right? What are you talking about?
And it's a survey.
Right. No value whatsoever. Yep.
Yeah, that was one of the things I learned, early on. I remember I had a manager who was actually a Sandler person, I think. He had gone through that training and whatnot. And I thought I was really good at questioning. And so he listened to a bunch of call recordings, and, it was kind of painful because he's like, listen, dude, yeah, you asked a ton of questions, but they were all like super surface level. It was just like question, answer, move on, question, answer, move on, question, answer, move on, question, answer, move on. He's like, pick one and drill into it. And that was pretty eye-opening for me. It's not just asking a bunch of questions for the sake of asking a bunch of questions. It has to have a meaning, and then you drill it down into something that gets into the pain gain, that gets into what have you done before? Has it worked? Why hasn't it worked? What are the options? That type of thing.
Yeah, and the brilliance is if you can get your team together and put this in the sales playbook, is identify, maybe 3 or 4 questions that will lead to your solution. And you can reverse engineer it. Because if you think of a NCAA basketball bracket, right? You have all of these different brackets coming out. So all of those different brackets lead down to your solution. And so, for example, if somebody were say, boy, we're missing revenue targets. Well, okay, so typically speaking, whenever I hear people are missing revenue targets, it's because either their sales team isn't performing, or maybe that they're performing, but or their sales team isn't effective because they're new, or their sales team is ineffective because maybe they're not trained or haven't had any any pathway. And they go, well, they're not really trained. Okay, so is that you've had training in the past and it didn't work, or you just don't believe in training? So you can build it out to the final of, well, let me make the suggestion, right? So that is a horrible example, but you get the idea, is find out the pathway to it.
Yeah, no, I love it. All right, so we've gone through strategy, we've gone through methodology, and the third pillar is structure, right? And is that where you're starting to get into your sales process? What's that mean?
No, so depending on your sales strategy would determine your sales structure. So do I have inside? Do I have outside? Do I have territory, right? So now how do I have that? Yeah, correct. How do I have that structured? And there's a book, forgive me, I can't remember the author. I think he's since passed away, but it's back from the 80s called The Goal. And it talks about the theory of constraints. And I think too many sales leaders mess this up. They don't understand their theory of constraints within their sales organization. So depending on what my sales strategy is, that's going to determine what my sales objectives are and my daily activities per person. So for those daily activities, how many can they do? And it's usually a time constraint. So, or if I'm really specialized, it might be a total addressable market constraint. So you have to figure out what those constraints are, and then you build your revenue targets, your goals, to that most limiting constraint. And so that's going to give you how to do your structure. So if I have a huge total addressable market, well, I'll probably have an inside team doing top of funnel work, then an AE group that then goes to customer success managers, so I can churn through that pretty darn quickly. Unless my average contract value is too low, and that won't work. So now I have to use a full cycle salesperson that maybe does everything over to an account manager, leverage technology to get up that flow, or maybe I change up my process. So I scrub the list and I use, we do what are called phone ready leads. We only call people that we know will pick up the phone. So we use those type of things. So that way the process is fixed to support that, so I don't have to add headcount. But it goes into that because if you look at your sales team structure, based upon that theory of constraint, you only have 4 levers to pull. You can adjust your strategy. I'm going to use super validated list, or I'm going to use, inside as opposed to outside, and as opposed to, open up territory. So that strategy or the process, I'm going to figure out the process a little bit more easily. I'm going to have, outsource people in the Philippines getting the list, so my SDRs don't have to do that. Or technology, how can I simplify that, automate it, or people? And what people have to realize is make sure that your strategy and process are down first before you throw people and technology at it. Because if you throw technology at it, you're going to do a bad job poorly more quickly. And if you put people to it with technology, you're going to do a bad job really quickly and extremely expensive.
Totally. How good do you think people are at evaluating their total addressable market?
I think pretty poor, because oftentimes they don't even know who their ICP is. It's incredible.
Yeah, because I wonder about that. When you talked about thinking about constraints, and obviously addressable market is one of the first things you should think about. And really getting your arms wrapped around your TAM, right? Like really getting your arms wrapped around it. And then creating segmentation within that TAM to start to figure out where your best fits live. And then getting into an ICP, ideal customer profiles type discussion. I just don't think enough organizations spend enough time there.
Well, for too long, how many times do you hear this? Oh, anybody can use our stuff, right? Right. That's not your TAM.
Being all things to all people is being nothing to no one.
100%. And so I think too often people don't go back to identify that ideal customer profile, which you brought up earlier. Then from there, because that's kind of company level, then the personas that are within it, and what is their emotional compelling reason why they're going to change their behavior. And there's a book, I think we actually mentioned it on your show, April Dunford's Obviously Awesome, where it gets into positioning and laying out the alternatives, because their alternative, doing nothing, apathy, and using an intern instead, spreadsheet hell, multiple versions of the truth, that might all be okay. So laying that out goes into that ICP. And I think if you do that, then you can figure out your total addressable market. And there's so many people out there now, I can go overseas and have them build up list and get a good, use Zoom Info or Apollo or whatever the case may be. I can at least get a sense of, okay, there's supposedly blankety blank 1,000 people. And if it's down to a couple of hundred, that's a completely different, you talk about niche, you better nail it.
That's niche. Yeah. You better dominate that niche real hard.
Yeah, really.
Exactly. So
I'm building battleships or something.
Yeah, something that's got a very high ticket value. Exactly right. So we're talking about structure here, and the structure of a sales team is driven oftentimes by the constraints that you have. During COVID, field sales organizations got crushed.
Yes.
Right. There's this, the road warriors, right? The enterprise seller, field seller who plans their entire week around the Tuesday trip to Iowa and the Thursday trip to Chicago. They've got 2 meetings in each city. The days in between are travel and prep or debrief. And then that just kind of like imploded during COVID, and they were looking to the inside salespeople to tell them how to work. Yeah. What's the future look like?
I really don't think that we ever have a fully outside sales team again. CFOs love the idea of no more territory managers or outside reps only. I think it's going to be hybrid or inside, because going back to that study was Gartner, right? That did the study. Yeah. They don't even want to see salespeople.
Right.
And too often people were showing up to entertain. They were great entertainers. They weren't salespeople. And I can have a conversation like this through Zoom. Everybody's comfortable with that before I jump on an airplane. Now, I'm not saying travel is never going to come back. It already is. Sometimes you need eyes on the ground to see what's going on within that plant, within whatever. So I think travel's there, but for the most part, I think that it's easier to pull everybody together. People are very comfortable in doing this. So I don't see, I really don't see us going back to strictly outside anymore.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've been hybrid my whole career, inside, outside. Like if I need to travel, I travel, right?
Right.
But I do the majority of the day-to-day initial calls, this and that is all done in an inside Zoom type of capacity. But I will tell you right now, the energy on the road is at an all-time high. People are very excited to be back together, customers, prospects, whatever it may be. So as long as you identify that right fit for who's ready to talk in person, it could be highly valuable.
Yeah, and I would say instead of that 2-day prep time or travel time, set it up where you're doing a little bit more inside work, or whenever you're sitting around in your hotel room doing a little bit more inside calling, right? Because I think we need a little bit more full cycle. There's a great HubSpot survey. Not sure if you've seen it, and I can pass it along to you, but it shows the level of outreach done since the beginning of 2020, January of 2020 was the benchmark year. Mm-hmm. And since then, right now, telephone calls are up 150%. Wow. Email sends are up 150%. Email reply rates are down between 31 and 35, somewhere along there, right?
Yeah.
So just so much noise out there. And I think the people that used to be road warriors take that account-based marketing approach, very specific, targeted, personalized. Take that approach and you're going to have a lot better, higher number of meetings, higher number of engagements, because I can start here and then nurture that along. And I might have a longer sales cycle, but that's where sales and marketing is coming into smarketing. Where are you identifying as the start of sales and marketing handoff, right? So it's kind of a curious thought.
Totally. All right, Bryan. So we've talked about the sales motion being composed of sales strategy, sales methodology, and sales structure, right? Got to nail those things. And that's all determined by your fit in the market, your size, all of those different types of things. What is the one thing that you think the audience should take away from this conversation?
One thing to take away is have your plan, and don't just wing it from a book. Don't look at somebody, another entrepreneur or another company that crushed it and build one like theirs. Find your own. Find out how big your market, because you have 4 components here. So here's your one takeaway. You have 4 levers. What's your market? That market consists of that ICP and the personas within that market. You have your medium to reach that market: telephone, email, social, in person, billboards, whatever you need to do.
Right.
You have your medium that you're going to engage your market. 3, your message. How are you going to communicate what you do in an emotional, compelling, pithy way that's going to get people's attention to stand out from the noise? And then 4, your messenger. How good is your messenger at delivering that message through the medium to your market? And those are your 4 M's. That's the takeaway. Know those things and you'll be all right.
I love it. Bryan, where do we find more of you?
I appreciate that. So you can hang out and listen to Josh and me on my podcast, the Talent Sales and Scale Show. That'll be coming up in a couple of weeks. You can look at me, look for me online. I post a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. Give a ton of content away. So it's Bryan. I spell my name wrong. It's Bryan with a Y, Whittington with an H. So look me up on LinkedIn, Bryan Whittington. You can check out. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll send this too for you, Josh. You can determine your own sales maturity, level of sales maturity through a free evaluation that we have. It'll take you 2 to 3 minutes. And it really lays this out and gives you an idea of, am I in trouble or am I good to go? So I'll pass it along to you. So ebsgrowth.com. Check me out on LinkedIn and listen to us on the Talent Sales and Scale Show. Josh crushed it. He was awesome.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, and Bryan, you also crushed it. And if you want to hear more from folks like Bryan, please leave us a review on your podcast provider. I know those Apple reviews really mean a lot. And Bryan, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, thanks so much, Josh. I really appreciate it. It was fun.